Okay, so I hope everyone's hearing me okay online and here in person as well. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm here to talk about one of Trinidad's most charismatic frog species, golden tree frog. It's also one of our most important frogs because it is actually endangered. So by learning more about the natural history of this frog, we can better protect it. So, we're gonna get started. Now, when it comes to trying to see this frog, you have to climb up mountains. And in particular, this is El Tecuch, the view from Trinidad here. Now, mountaintops are unique habitats. The microclimate there is different compared to other parts, like, for example, lower down. You have cooler temperatures, as I experience, and it tends to rain a lot more. So you get a lot of unique animals and plants that are found there that you wouldn't find lower down in the mountains or other parts of the country. You also tend to have fewer human disturbed areas. So, for example, people living there or agricultural areas. So the animals there tend to be less disturbed than other parts of the country. Now, for those of you who have height altitude, it's a nice, easy, brisk walk. And but one of the reasons why a lot of people have not seen the golden tree frog is because, of course, it is a little bit challenging to get there. But if you do make that effort, you can be rewarded. Now, just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of that particular hike, on the left, where the road ends and the natural soil begins, it's where you're gonna start going uphill. And in the middle picture, it is very steep. You can't really see it too well here, but I'm pretty much looking up at our trail to get to the top. Thankfully, we do have the roots for these trees that act as steps that kind of help us climb this literal mountain. And as you start getting closer to the top, you will start seeing this particular plant on the right, a giant tank bromeliad. Now, this plant tends to only be found on mountaintops. They prefer that cooler temperatures and they prefer a bit more rain. There are different types of bromeliads, but this specific one is closely associated with the golden tree frog. So you tend to only start to see this bromeliad higher at the top of the mountain, and that's where the golden tree frog is. So once you actually do make it to the top, after however long it takes you at your own pace, you may be lucky to come across the golden tree frog. But in order to do that, you probably will have to stay out at night. They are nocturnal, so El Tecuch is a regular hiking trail, a common one. Most people hiking there throughout the day, I would say almost 100% have not seen a golden tree frog. But if you do stay out at night with permits, you might be rewarded with seeing this particular frog. Now, the golden tree frog gets its common name from those golden reticulations you see from the rostrum all the way to the dorsum on the back, on the top of the frog, and as well in the eyes. If you look into the eyes, from the pupil, you can see that golden reticulations. So it's one of the reasons why it has that common name. Now, this particular frog is important because of its international conservation status, which in this case is currently classified as endangered. Locally or nationally, it has a status as an environmentally sensitive species. It's the only amphibian with this status in the country to date. So for these reasons, this frog is very important to us here in the country and globally as well. Now, before we kind of learn about the frog, I'm just kind of going to go through a history of what we do know so far, because by learning what we have on what has been done so far, we can then move forward to what we need to do and what we and what is the requirement. So, firstly, the frog was described well over 100 years ago And then in the 1960s, Kenny was a very well-renowned amphibian biologist. He compiled a publication on the amphibia Trinidad. And with it, he would have then went up to Couch, which is where the species was discovered and described, and confirmed that it is still there. So after these decades, we know the frog is still thriving at Couch so far at the moment. So in 1983, a couple of decades later, Murphy and Humbert went up to Couch, and this is the image here, and they reconfirmed that the golden tree frog is indeed still there. So Murphy there inspecting bromeliads. But simultaneously that same year, or around the time, Reed went to Sierra Leone and for the first time found a population of the golden tree frog there. So prior to 1983, the golden tree frog was only known from Couch, and one of the previous common names was the Couch golden frog. But Reed discovered a population at Sierra Leone. So in the 1980s, there were two mountaintops that had the golden tree frog. So moving forward now to the 90s, Clark and colleagues then, using the data that was actually already compiled before by Reed, by Murphy, by Kenny, wanted to look at the distribution and status. The status being an attempt at actually counting the number of frogs using the bromeliads, because they found that the frog was closely associated with the bromeliad. Now, to do this, unfortunately, it involved destructive sampling. So you would have to actually peel away the leaf axils of these bromeliads to try and find these frogs. These are huge bromeliads, and the frogs tend to be well hidden, sometimes all the way to the bottom, and they can flatten their body as well. So it was hard to actually see them. So they kind of gave an account, but this was a form of destructive sampling. But thankfully, as time progressed, there were less invasive methods, which I'll kind of touch on just now. So Murphy, like Kenny, then compiled that information into one whole story in the Amphibians and Reptiles of Trinidad and Tobago book from 1997. And then in 2008, Jowers and colleagues used molecular data to assign the golden tree frog to its own genus. It was previously Phyllodytes or Apis, but using the molecular data from the golden tree frog here, it was significantly different from the other Phyllodytes that are found in Brazil, which is a bit far away from us. So based on that and some other behavioral differences, they assigned it to its own genus. Now, prior to 2015, the golden tree frog was considered a Trinidad endemic, an island endemic. But our colleagues in Venezuela, Rivas and De Freitas, detected and discovered the golden tree frog in Venezuela. Now, this is perhaps not surprising because Trinidad and Venezuela shares a lot of similar species. So some species in Trinidad are found in Venezuela. So it was found in mountaintop peaks in the same giant time bromeliad, which is also found in Venezuela, in the Paria Peninsula. Now, they took photographs of the frog, and morphologically, it is considered the same species, but molecular analysis could perhaps prove otherwise, but this is something that probably needs to be done. Now, I mentioned the destructive sampling, which was a way to try and detect the frogs. In the 2010s, a new method emerged, this being eDNA. So the two different groups of researchers looked at the application of eDNA, which is essentially environmental DNA. What this comprises of is by simply taking a water sample from the tank bromeliads, which is where the frog was known to be associated with, taking a water sample and testing the residue of DNA of organisms for the golden tree frog. So when these golden tree frog adults and tadpoles are in the bromeliads and in the water, some of their residue from their DNA is mixing in it. And you can then test this water for the presence or absence of the golden tree frog. So they were able to detect the golden tree frog using this method. So it's a less invasive way without having to destroy the tank bromeliads. Simply take a little bit of water in a little syringe, and that's it. Now, Torres and colleagues, they looked at 3 different peaks across Trinidad: El Tecuch, Sur de Ripo, which is where the 2 peaks we are known for the golden tree frog, but a third one, Chagaramal. And they took one, I believe it was one sample from there, and there was a positive detection for the golden tree frog. So if we go all the way back prior 1983, El Tecuch was the only mountain that was known to have the golden tree frog. And by 2017, there are at least 4 mountain peaks that are known to have the golden tree frog. 3 on Trinidad and 1 so far on Venezuela. And the field guide, of course, from the Trinidad Field Naturalist Club sort of summarizes all that information in a more recent record, publication, and then a chapter of the Caribbean amphibian conservation. So from my digging of what has been done, we can now look forward to what we need to do. So some of the gaps for the golden tree frog include, well, almost everything, because so far we only know where they are, but not much else in terms of their threats, in terms of their natural history. So there were a couple of publications that came out very recently, which is what I'm going to share with you in a little bit more detail here. And it involved detecting a pathogen at El Tecuch, which is of conservation concern, and then information on the call, behavior, and tackle that. Now, the golden tree frog was believed to be voiceless, according to some authors, but that is not the case. They actually do have a call, and it is very diverse. You'll get to see it just now. And then a couple of things that are in the works, and I'll just kind of preview this, some more information on natural history. And what was done basically this year, looking at the elevational distribution at El Tecuch, using another new technique and a less invasive one, acoustic monitoring. So we detected a fungal pathogen in El Tecuch. And its short term is known as BD, but it's also known as a Chytrid fungus, or Chytrid, depending on how you pronounce it. And BD is a fungal pathogen responsible for amphibian declines and extinctions worldwide. This pathogen occurs naturally in the environment at certain environmental parameters. And once these spores get onto these frogs, some frogs are very vulnerable and it can kill them. What it essentially does is that it impairs the frog's skin, which then makes the frog susceptible or unable to absorb water and control the electrolytes through its skin, which can stop its heart. So this fungal pathogen is deadly for these frogs. And as a result, it is important to sample threatened frog species for it towards improving their conservation management. So just to give you an idea of what you actually have to do to actually sample and test the frog for the Chytrid fungus. This is me here holding a frog in Brazil. So I have the gloves on. And I'm holding this frog by its hips to kind of pin down the legs. And that way you're not actually harming the organs in the main body. So you pin it down by the hips and hold on the legs. And I have what is essentially an elongated Q-tip. So you swab the frog body, the outer layer, and if there are the fungal pathogen spores, it'll pick up on the little Q-tip. You then store it in a syringe or otherwise, and then send it to a lab, and they run it for DNA to test if it's positive or not. So this essentially was done in 2022 at El Tecuch. Unfortunately, we did detect this fungal pathogen in the golden tree frog. As a matter of fact, in both adults and larvae, but also in 2 other species found at El Tecuch, Plectinotus, which is the marsupial frog, and Pristimantis euricae, the Euryx frog. So the main thing to kind of highlight here, other than of course the golden tree frog having Chytrid fungus or BD, is that there were some samples or some individuals with very high concentrations of that particular fungus on it. And this is not good news. This could actually cause these frogs to go extinct, just to make that very clear, because they are isolated essentially in a sky island. They can't go further up, sideways, or down to evade this fungus because they have to be where the microclimate is suitable for them. And how it spreads is if one frog has it, touches the next frog, it spreads. Humans can also spread this to frogs as well. So it's important to know that. So at altitude, the chytrid fungus is present. Now, one thing to note, other global threats could actually make this worse because, and in particular, climate change. Climate change could cause fluctuations in temperature and as well in precipitation, rainfall, humidity. Now, this fungus thrives in certain microclimates, like the golden tree frog. If climate change exacerbates this situation, it can have a cascading effect and causing the fungus perhaps to spread even more naturally in the environment, exposing these frogs to the disease. So these frogs are facing these two major threats in particular. Now, parental care is something that is observed in some species of frogs and different families across the world. And these are just 3 examples locally in Trinidad and Tobago. So on the left is the Tobago glass frog. This is a male guarding the egg clutches. And you might see one clutch kind of already hatched, and there are 3 others that are developing. This frog is clearly a very popular one because a few minutes later, when I came back, he got another female to mate with him. So he's going to have another clutch of eggs. And he will stay and guard his eggs on that leaf until they all hatch throughout the day and at night. On the top right is the marsupial frog. Here, it's the female. So there's maternal care. The mothers, in this case, after the eggs are fertilized, she carries the eggs in her back in a pouch, and she'll carry them until the tadpoles are ready to hatch. And she'll then carry them to a bromeliad, by the golden tree frog, to deposit the tadpoles. On the bottom right is the Trinidad stream frog. For the hikers, this is a frog you would have probably heard or seen on many different hiking trails across Trinidad. This is a male, so there's paternal care in this species, like the Tobago glass frog. So he has the tadpoles on his back, if you might be able to see it. And what he's going to do, he's going to carry them from one pool of water to another. Typically one where there are either no or fewer tadpoles, because the tadpoles in this species are cannibalistic, but also pools without predatory animals like the Eurypylus fish. Now, in terms of the golden tree frog, when we observed the bromeliads with tadpoles, we did not see any adults nearby guarding them. So this suggests that there is no parental care in this particular species, which is the golden tree frog. There are other frogs that don't exhibit parental care as well. So this isn't too unique, but it's interesting to note. And the diet of the tadpoles. Now, when it comes to most amphibian research, there's very few information on tadpoles. But in this case, we also wanted to look at the diet of the tadpoles. And to do this, you can simply just turn the tadpole over and look at its belly. And you can see the area of the intestines just above the tail and below the red part. And from looking at these tadpoles, we saw what looks like detritus, which is organic matter. And we did not see any round objects, which could be eggs. So it was suspected that they might be cannibalistic. But so far, evidence suggests they are not. They feed on detritus, which is the plant and animal organic matter found in the tank bromeliads. So this is new information that we know about the golden tree frog that we didn't know before. And perhaps one of the most interesting aspects was to actually observe the adults and record the call for the first time. So we were able, in using both phone and in person and camera traps, to actually record the calls of the golden tree frog. So I'm going to just play a few videos and hopefully everything goes okay. And this is the male calling. It's a kind of like a crow call, like a, and it continues like that. And that's the male in a bromeliad calling. But interestingly, where most frogs, it's mostly the males that call, we actually found that it's both the males and the females that call. Now, this isn't too unnatural. There are some female frogs that do call, but this is a female here. If you want to actually see these videos, they are on YouTube, and I don't mind sending a link, and you can actually listen to it properly. There are actually more, so these are just the ones I put together here. But I do have links to these videos, so I'm happy to share them. So that was from 2022. And we then decided we're going to return this year, actually 2 months ago, to El Tecuch. So it involved a couple of researchers from the US who are looking at elevational distribution, and as well a team of keen, local, national, from Trinidad naturalists who want to share this frog and its importance to everyone by photographing it in its natural environment. So we hiked up a couple of months ago with the intention of spending a night or two. So just imagine hiking uphill with 30 pounds on your back and spending the night on top of a mountain at 18, 19 degrees Celsius. But by doing this, we're able to actually learn more about the frog. So in general, all the past history publications have all stated that the frog lives its entire life cycle in tanking layers, from tadpole to adult. But do they? In this case, most of the frogs we saw that night were indeed on tampon layers, but there were a few individuals that were on different types of plants perched, and it's unsure what exactly behavior they were exhibiting then, but it's possible they were just waiting there to predate on a flying insect that might happen to come by or crawling one. So they will actually utilize different plants. So you can actually find a golden tree frog not only in the bromeliad at the top of El Tecuch. Now, in 2022, we kind of found out what the tadpoles feed on, which is detritus, organic matter. But what about the adults? So there has been no published information on what the adults feed on so far. So essentially their diet, which is an important component of their biology, which can go towards its conservation. And while we were photographing one individual, an insect landed on top of the frog and then made the mistake of climbing on top of its head, in which case the frog quickly grabbed it with its mouth and swallowed it whole. So this all took place in a very short time, but some of us were able to see this insect long enough to at least identify it to superfamily or something like that. So a very fortuitous event, we were able to actually see what the frogs predate on. Now, most frogs tend to feed on a variety of different insects, invertebrates, arthropods. So we now have at least one record of the diet of the golden tree frog. I'm sort of like tentatively not revealing these things because you will hopefully read about it soon in a nature note. And another thing we notice, and it's important to highlight, is that, so we know the chytrid fungus is something that it affects these frogs and potentially it can be susceptible to. But fungal pathogens are the only types of diseases. There are also viruses and bacteria. And like us humans, frogs and other organisms are prone to these different types of infections. So we know they are prone to the fungal pathogen, but are they prone to other types of infections? I will actually show this because we saw this frog with some sort of weird protrusion on the side of the body, and it didn't look like any sort of clinical sign of disease in terms of chytrid for me. So I kind of just did some digging, and I asked a veterinarian friend of mine because I had an idea of what I think it is. And what it looks like to me is an abscess. And abscesses have been reported in frogs before, and they are caused by bacterial infections. So the golden tree frog is not only prone or susceptible to fungal pathogens, but bacterial as well. The actual extent of how this would impair the frog is unknown because, of course, we did not take any frogs on site. We photographed them, left them there, and that's it. But the extent of how common or popular this is in the population is unknown. And this is something that will require investigation. Again, all this information can help guide conservation of species. So in terms of future directions, I mentioned that the American colleagues are looking at elevational distribution, specifically at altitude, and this is ongoing. What they're using are acoustic recorders. So because 3 years ago, we know what the call is, we can actually use that to non-invasively monitor the frog. So it's another non-invasive method like eDNA to detect the frog species. And by combining these recorders with data loggers, you can kind of get an idea of how certain climatic conditions might actually impair or affect the behavior. In this case, the vocalizing behavior. And to get an idea of how much of an impact climate change will have on species. This is something we don't know, and this is something that is known for a lot of other amphibian species across the world. But given that the golden tree frog is a mountain endemic type restricted species, they are very susceptible to climate change. As I mentioned earlier, if it gets hotter, they can't go up any further. They can't fly. They can't go sideways. It's pretty much restricted. They can't go down. It's too hot. So as it starts to get hotter, and as rainfall tends to fluctuate even more, this frog could actually be very susceptible to this type of conditions, especially considering that they are only found in these cool microclimates. Now, a lot of the research is biased toward altitude, probably because it's an easy trail to follow. I'm not saying to walk up, but to follow. But we don't know exactly what the status is, the population at Cerro del Rico and the one discovered in Chaguaramal, and even the one in Venezuela. So this is an area that really requires focus moving forward so that we can also get an idea of, let's say, for example, what the elevational distribution is at these sites, whether the chytrid fungus is actually at these sites, and how extensive it is within the population. If we actually do sample, for example, BD, the chytrid fungus, in all these sites, and it is discovered in high prevalence there, that would require an upgraded conservation status from endangered to critically endangered. Again, without knowing, we don't know how serious or how close this species is actually to going extinct without this information. In terms of other research, again, compared to other frogs, we know very little about the golden tree frog, so there's a wide scope. But one example of something that could be also done is looking at its biochemistry. So, for example, there are studies that have looked at how the chemical properties, the natural chemical properties in the frog actually makes it hardy to chytrid or more susceptible to the fungal pathogen. This is something that, if it can be done, would give us a better idea of how vulnerable they are to that particular disease, considering we know it is there. But of course, we can't all do this for free, and we do need funding. And this is where I will try and advocate for both local, national, and international funding for this problem. As I mentioned, the golden tree frog is an environmentally sensitive species. There has been funding done for the other ESS in the country, but so far not a golden tree frog, and hopefully this can change. But also from an international perspective, there's a lot more research being done in certain parts of the world, like North America and Europe and Australia, but less so on islands, less so in the Caribbean, small island developing states. All these different areas, there tend to be less research, and hopefully international organizations could try and put more effort into studying these organisms that are worth saving. And of course, I'm more than happy to collaborate, anyone who's willing to work on anything related to the golden tree frog. So just to kind of wrap up, of course, I just want to thank Wildlife Section and EMA for permits, for the research, and of course, camping out at Intercooch. And the 2025 team that went up, I listed everyone here that was part of the team. These are just some of the members here who are actually here as well. And yeah, we couldn't have done it without them. So thanks, guys. And of course, Team Actress members as well, including Dan. And thanks. So let's save the golden tree frog. Thank you.